she and Mike Gegenheimer, who is sitting next to her, are going to be on the side of there's an end to the search. And Tyler and Paul, who are closer to me here, are going to be saying that there is no end to the search. There's no end to the search. So who would like to start us off with, is there an end to the search or not? Okay, Anima's going to start us off.
I'm going to do a 4-minute timer here, and then that'll be using up 1 minute.
Yeah. So there is an end to the search. To me, it was about, I realized it later that it's an identity crisis. That's how my whole search bottled down to. And so when you find your identity, when you know who you are, when you know the source, I feel that was the end of my search. And you know it. There is a yardstick to it. To me, that was, end of all my questions, end of all my inner angst, end of that doubt sensation, and the inner baseline that I lived from, that feeling of something is not correct, something is not finished, dissatisfaction, no matter what you do, no matter how good the things are outside. But there is that inner baseline from where I lived. That changed. So to me, that showed, it just like it was, it showed to me that, to me, that would be the qualification that it's the end of my search. So what else? Yeah, it's the solid ground of being. So no matter what is going on, it never gets questioned that, who you are never is in relation to the outside, whatever is going on. That's the end of the search, when you have that direct, solid ground of being, and so what else? There is no, the other thing is my pain, I realized, was about separation. I felt separate. And then that even if the other person wants to be separate from you, there can be no separation because all comes out of the same source. So even with the people you don't, outside, you realize there is no separation. There is no separation with the source. There is no separation here. That was another thing which was big for me. Yep. Other thing is that you don't feel any need to change things. Still, uncomfortable things. Life happens. Whatever is the nature of life, it's going to happen. Day, night, you'll get sick, you'll get depressed, things will happen. You'll get angry with your kids, relationships problem, people in your life will die. So things happen, but there is no feeling of, oh, it shouldn't be, this shouldn't be like that. It's just like, So, and it's not like, it's not a place of just ecstasy or bliss or a place of, something ecstatic or something different. It's just like the solidity of it all. So that to me shows the end of search, and it shows with your identity, what you become, who you become, and after that there is no question ever that comes up for you, that you ever question, who am I, what am I doing? What am I doing comes up though. But yes, so that shows to me the end of search.
Thank you, Anima.
Thank you.
So I think the real question is there an end to the search? And so I agree with Arneman, not just because we got assigned the end, but I think that in fact, for me, there was an end to the search. And I was reminded of the day it occurred, and Bob Sergel talked to me as he was leaving, and he said, "Gee, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to you." And the thought flashed in my head, I said goodbye to Mike this morning already. And it's just as Arnima says, you find, at least on the one hand, what you're not with absolute finality, and what's left is all that there is. And there's no way a person can prove it to you, and that's why we all have a search in front of us. But I think discovering that with finality is clear. And along the way in my own search, there were several stages along the way where I felt there were significant realizations or partial realizations, but in every case there was still a sense of identity clinging to life. And part of what is the problem that I think we all face as seekers is that we're clinging to the mind in a way that it evidences we think the mind is going to make a trip somewhere, that it's still going to be around. It doesn't. It's not present. It's where you truly are. So the end of the search. There's no one left to seek identity. So there's not anything further. There's just what is, the awareness, allness, and the absolute. And the allness is something that is a bit of a paradox, because, and this is where maybe I think our friends over here are going to take off on it, but the fact of there being paradoxes that the mind can't understand afterwards means that your mind may still be searching for some kind of answers, but it won't be the question of identity. Bob Sergel articulated one last night about how could something absolute somehow be apprehended or remembered by the relative mind, but somehow this happens. So I think that following realization of what you're not and what remains that is your identity, we all come back to life, and so the wisdom of continuing to look for a way to articulate it, a way to deal with the paradoxes, is where people continue, or at least I've continued to try to search out answers. But again, it's not related to identity at this point.
Still got a minute if you want it. Okay. How are you?
Okay. This is really hard to talk about because I don't actually disagree with what they said, but I'm going to try and move a little further from it. So I can testify that for me, this whole thing was an epic failure to find what I was looking for. It was in every way an annihilative process. And that the thing that was looking to become enlightened or looking for its true identity, it didn't make it, but it saw itself in such a way, it saw itself as ever constant outside of space and time, in the deep sleep state, waking state, dream state, right now, that aspect of seeking that was looking for it fell away, is the best I can describe it. It saw its true nature to such an extent that seeking went away. However, that's only one aspect. What also happened was seeing very clearly that what I actually am is simultaneous with what's arising in the world. And that includes every sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. And so I could see what the Zen guys meant when they said to become enlightened by all things. Every sight is your true nature, every sound, touch. It's not a philosophy, it's not a concept, it's you. And upon seeing that, I saw very clearly, well, there's no beginning or end to that. There's no getting to the end of this totally mysterious, infinite, unknown thing I know myself to be. And so how it shows up is always, a state of total unknowing. But it's constantly changing in how it shows up, even though what it is the substratum of all that's showing up. And so it's really hard to put this to words, but I've never found an end to the revelation of my own infinite nature. And how it's going to show up, what it might feel like, the relationship, any kind of relationship what's left with any kind of reflective thinking, how it integrates with the human experience. I've never found an end. Even though what it is the end. So I don't disagree on the sense of you can find your true identity in some sense. The search for your identity is over. But for me, it's opening up then a new chapter, which is a great place to be. I mean, you get to just see what you are and see what presents itself. It's a great way of being. Why I took this side when Art sent this around is more practical, and that is, as I shared a little bit last night, and please don't pretend I'm saying this as a rule, but my self-inquiry was superficial most of the time. I was looking for an enlightened version of myself. I wasn't looking for the substratum of all experiences, and I don't even know if I could have. I'm not sure that's even possible, but it wasn't until some time when I started to give up and let go of this idea I was going to become enlightened, that not right away, but at some point I started to become more interested in what was arising right now in a more authentic way, is the only way I can describe it. Started looking, well, what's here that doesn't ever change? What is constant through every single experience? And becoming more interested in that, I use the term, was feeling like I was becoming more and more still. There was a letting go of chasing a particular experience that would happen at some point in the future. It was coming back to this, resting as this, abiding as this, and then ultimately finding my true identity. But while that idea was up and running, that I'm going to get to this end, and again, I don't know if it could even be different, but while that was up and running, most of my self-inquiry was not very genuine. I mean, it was what was happening, but I was looking for an enlightened version of myself. And I never found it. That's the joke. I never found an enlightened version of myself. I only found the thing that's already enlightened right now. And so nothing was gained. The only thing that was lost was the experiential sense of seeking an identity. So that's my way with it, That's the language I use. I don't know if it tracks everyone else's, but I haven't gotten to the end of my infinite nature. And right now it's showing up as this human life, and it's cool. I don't have the slightest clue it's going to show up when this, what happens, if it's going to be another life with another species. I have no idea. But I know it's not going to end because I don't end. So we'll just have to wait and see.
I'm kind of in the same position. I could take the other side, so I'm gonna violate the rules a little bit. and quibble over the words search and discovery. So last night I would use myself in an example. I mentioned I had this epic experience of emptying out and immersion in nothingness, what I consider death of the personality of Phil, the mind death. And anybody probably could have looked at that as an enormous gift and stopped there. But there was just something unsettled for me. And it felt like I wasn't done. I knew it was I could have said a final answer in a way, but and I also mentioned self-doubt last night. That was still there. So if I had been satisfied at that point, I may have stopped. But there was still something more to do. I felt that there was still something more to discover. So I also mentioned later on there was another shoe to drop, and took another 7 years. So if I had just stopped with the first epic experience, I would have never gotten the gift, which I feel even diminishes that even further. And that was what I would characterize as a realization of everythingness. And with that came the gift of love, and capital L, love. So I do want to, I guess, caution. This was so confusing to me as a seeker. Who has realized this person is saying their experience is final. This person is saying no, there's more happening in eternality all the time right now. You've all heard the words. So I do think it's really important for people to be super honest with themselves, to make sure that their heart is filled and their search is over. I had such a heartache for this, and it was just, my life was consumed by it. And I mentioned last night, it wasn't like I was on the red line, the tachometer's on the red line every minute, every day, but there was definitely a void in my life. And until what I would consider the merging of everything and nothingness, there was still more to come. So there was a point where it felt like that heartache disappeared, and the self-doubt, those, I guess if I had 2 yardsticks for an end, that would be it. Self-doubt falling away and my heartache disappearing. It was a longing to go home, and it was always there and unsatisfied until I did. So there's a strategy that Rose mentioned, which I've talked about a lot of times. Some people glaze over, but it's Jacob's ladder, and the strategy very simply is I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not thoughts and feeling, and there's a backing away into something which is the most real, the absolute. However, this is where it gets into maybe not a final experience. However, there is a coming down off the mountain. There was for me. So I am my thoughts and feelings. I am my body. This is my life. This is how I live. I feel like my experience of becoming more deeply rooted in that fundamental nature, which is awareness, has given me just more opportunities to observe myself, to see how I interact with people. I was so uncomfortable around people, and I just didn't feel like I was in my own skin when I interacted with people. And many of you know, like now I'm on a board with a condominium association, so I'm out walking around, and I just love interacting with people. So I bring this heart centered way of being into everyday experiences with people. Just looking into the eyes of somebody in a grocery store, there's just this direct connection. And so those are kind of what I would consider, is that one? I have 1 minute. Okay. And my passions to continue with, it's still a search to me. My passions with rapport, sitting with people at these meetings, the idea of transmission. There's like exploring the boundaries of that way of being with people in this search. And of course, the last thing I'll say with my friends. There's always things that people teach me, so I don't feel like I certainly don't come across as knowing it all, but there's much to be learned with my spiritual friends. It's a special type of friendship, and that's just leaves more to be discovered. That's it.
Thank you, Phil. So we've got 20 minutes for questions and answers. I'm going to start the clock. You have any? Yeah, Benji.
Yeah, I have a question for Anima. You were expressing a kind of a finality, and I think you said the end of existential angst. I'm just curious because yesterday in the kitchen you were talking about, I think you were saying about your kids leaving home and you felt lost, and I was surprised to hear you say that. Can you talk about that? Maybe seems like a conflict.
Right. So, yeah, it's this phase of my life, I'm 52, 53 years old. I'm going through a certain phase of my life. And my kids recently left home. And so I realized what my role as a mother is now over. It's not I don't miss my children. I miss that mothering part, taking care of things, going volunteering at the school. Why aren't you home? What's going on? How are the exams? All that, the busyness of a mom. And it's over now. It's like a good, a pretty dream phase is over. Now, it's not like it's a mood. It's a nostalgia for something that's gone. So it's just me reacting. It doesn't mean that, that it's not about my identity. It's just something that I'm enjoying. I'm experiencing, or life is showing me this.
So the question is there an end to motherhood, or there is no end to motherhood?
There is, whatever starts always ends. That's the law. So yeah. Yeah.
So I know that for many years you were very into meditation. And I remember you saying not too long ago that you don't meditate. So I was just curious as to what brought on, first of all, why continue practicing after you had your first breakthrough, and why did you decide that it wasn't any longer necessary for you?
Yeah. So my history of meditation was myriad. So I first of all followed Rose's idea of meditation, and I wasn't a fan of sitting still, so I would go for walks and watch my mind. So that was last night I said, set aside an hour a day, and that was my commitment to truth. So I'd come home from work and go for a walk and look within, just watch the mechanics of my mind. Rose also had an idea of productive thinking, so sitting down and saying, I want to think along these lines in this 1 hour or whatever, and not allow the mind to be distracted, to stay on point with that and see if something arises that is helpful. And then I came across another teacher who taught sitting meditation, and what attracted me to it was because my mind, I've always been captivated by rapport. And so Richard Rose would have these spontaneous rapports in our group meetings, and the energy was just alive. I'm just wired to feel that type of energy. And so the idea captivated me with this teacher. Hey, they're sitting in silence together with the same intention, and there's definitely a magic to that. But the thrust of it was you couldn't do that with a teacher more than a week, retreat. So the idea was to go back home and initiate this practice where I used to get up before work and 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was magical. Like especially in the summer, the windows were open and it would be dead silent outside, and suddenly you could hear things coming to life, the bird life and whatnot. And it just wasn't about feeling good. It was still following the technique of looking within during that period of sitting. This wasn't about making myself more comfortable. And I just loved doing it. Like I just got really into it. And I think everybody here can experience where they've taken on a hobby or something with work or whatever, and you just really go full tilt. I was super enthused, and I was getting a lot out of it. I was seeing a lot about myself while I was sitting. And to answer your question, what changed? I don't know. It felt like it was becoming rote, like a obligation. And I think that's whatever you're doing for seeking, that's a good yardstick. Like you're doing this because you feel like a teacher told you to do it, or you feel like I don't have anything better to do, so maybe I'll do this meditative practice. It just lost its juice. And I know we talked in some TAP meetings about breaking your tools. Like we all have tools. I've had tools through my life that I've used, and I just wore them out. I broke them. And that was one after a couple of years. We were actually on a scuba diving trip, and I was sitting there thinking, I'm done. Like I was trying to meditate on vacation, and I thought this is just incongruent with what I want to do with the meditative practice. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's...
Well, do you do any kind of meditation at all now? Do you feel like it's just totally...
No.
Nothing, okay.
No, sadly, I say this, when I used to leave TAT meetings, I, as many of you know, I was really engaged with TAT, the TAT business aspects, which I would recommend for everybody. I got huge dividends by doing that. But when I leave TAT meetings, my mind just isn't on it anymore. Except when I was saying before, when I engage with people, I'm not doing it artificially. I just kind of bring out a heart-filled way of relating with people. So that's I'm not engaged in the main practice. I still love talking about it. I love sitting in rapport with people and meditating with people. But I love TAP meetings, but it's just not something that captivates me once I leave. I would highly recommend it. I mean, find the meditative practice. You've got enough information with different books up there and Richard Rose's teaching, but find what works for you, what resonates.
I have a question for Mike G. So I noticed when you said earlier about how you said goodbye to Mike already, there was really strong sad reaction in me. And I was wondering, because you were talking about things that we cling to, But sometimes I notice like I would identify things that I cling to. It's more like a mechanical, like abstract. Okay, this is what I identify with. I'll cling to, but it seems like a component of like the feeling level of grieving its loss or something like that. Maybe needed. I wonder if you can speak something about that, or that's something you worked with.
I'm trapped again. So if I understand your question, because you speak kind of softly and I hear very poorly. So you're asking, is there some sort of grieving that is part of the process, or yeah, I think grieving is a reaction to the process of seeing something. It can be short of, seeing something as clearly as what I was describing. It can be just simply seeing a pattern about yourself, or a belief about yourself, or a behavior, something that is non-flattering to your personal opinion, so of yourself. So that happens all along the way. And I remember beginnings of the search, doing what Richard Rose advised, which is looking at back in the past and looking at past traumas, not current ones, but past traumas, like you're watching a roll of film, and just to observe it. And I remember thinking, my God, does it have to be this painful? And because I was kind of a mental pretzel in many ways, an emotional pretzel too, and it was there were many times I'd just be in tears, seeing things about myself that just were painful. But that's because there was an attachment to something there. Everybody loves themselves. There's a fellow sitting here with a T-shirt that says you spend all day thinking about yourself. And, that's that self-referential thinking that people engage in. So, there's an element of grieving, but it's a reaction to seeing something perhaps more truly than before. It's not like changing your belief, like, oh, I'm a terrible person because I kicked a dog. Well, maybe the dog needed to be kicked, right? But it's more seeing something about yourself that you see as true. And the one thing I referred to about Bob earlier was it was a reaction to what had occurred earlier in the day, which was seeing the absolute absence of everything. I think you could use the word nothingness to describe it, but that permeated the next couple months. I mean, I talked to a number of the people sitting here over that time frame, and it was it was a difficult time, just because everywhere I looked, all I saw was nothing, which is the different than saying everything is. For me, the other shoe had dropped years earlier. I didn't realize it at the time, but it had. But so this part of it was, the reaction was very strong. But I'm so happy to have seen that, free of that.
Got 7 more minutes. You got more questions? Yeah.
Just something you said about nothingness, and you started with nothingness and ended up with everything and love. Like, how do those two jive together?
You go first.
He's afraid I'll say nothing, and now he has to say everything. I think that that's one of the paradoxes, and that's one of the big paradoxes that remained. There's a saying that if you realize your source. Some questions are answered, other questions become irrelevant, and some questions remain. And one of them that remained for me was, how can source, absoluteness, reveal nothingness to something that doesn't exist? I mean, even to state the question or to try to fumble for words is for me a problem, because it's just one of those things staring at you. And the only thing I've been able to resolve at this point is just simply how it worked. I don't know any other explanation. It's kind of like, how does everything evolve from source? It happens, and the mind is somehow transforming everything into heaven and earth, like the sutra says. So I don't know. I'm babbling here. I don't know that I've answered your question, but Mr. All-ness here can maybe fill us in on the rest.
Fill us in.
That was awful. I give it a 7. Well, I think one of Rose's key points about the conciliatory principle applies here. So it's not nothingness, it's not everythingness, it's everything in between nothingness and everythingness, and rising above that with a different perspective. So what I feel is a really, I'm biased of course, but what I feel is a really good strategy. There's something in us that is watching. I think most people in this room can rise above thoughts and feelings and kind of see the two opposites in themselves and all the shades of gray in between. But that, in my experience, that watching or observer was cold. It was an awareness that was detached, but watching the mechanics of my mind, and which includes thoughts and feelings. And so I don't know if this is just unique to me, but it feels, my burning question was, what is the source of my awareness? I knew I was aware. So where is that coming from? And when I sat down in the community building to, probably the 15,000th time to meditate, I got my answer to that question. That was the emptying out, the death experience. And to me, that still felt like, looking back, there was like no warmth, no compassion to that. It was cold. And so maybe that's where I had help, or something pushed me, or I pushed myself to figure out what the polar opposite of that might be. And maybe it was listening to other teachers, some of my TAT friends who have had realizations. My perspective wasn't jiving with theirs. And so the other shoe, in my case, which was 6-7 years later, the realization was that here's where it gets kind of tricky, but the nothingness contains the relative. So the everythingness, and it's the merging of the two that made it complete. And there was just much more. I mean, think about love. Okay, what is unconditional love? Unconditional love cannot refuse anything. It's accepting what's coming into it. So this divine, or this aspect about ourselves, is unconditional, pure love. So everything that's coming through us, I don't know if it's coming into us or through us, what the direction is, but I don't know if that's help. I'm trying to even think, like, how does this discussion even help somebody? But the only thing I could say is, I hope this inspires you. Like, I've actually thought was this trip worth it? I sacrificed a lot, and I think everybody here who has done seeking understands that and finding. And the answer is almost immediately yes, but there's a big sacrifice to it. So the only thing I could see about talking about this is it might inspire, I hope it what does he mean, nothingness, everythingness? Well, I got to find out for myself. That's the only way it works.
So I have a question for the opposite team.
Oh no, the big guns are out.
Yes. So Tyler and Phil, like Mr. Rose said, you don't find, you become. What does that mean to you?
I like that, because in truth, you don't really become it because you're already it, but experientially felt like I became the world. And that there's a blending of identity of not just being back here, but here. So like a lot of the journey could be described as a backward movement. Get behind thoughts and feelings. Get behind decision making, which is a huge one. Then you get back to kind of like this kind of witnessing everything. And it can feel like you're pretty free back there, but in my experience, there was no joy. There was some relief, but no joy. But it wasn't until identifying as that witnessing thing went away that then this, including sights and sounds, and became I. And I could see why someone would use the word becoming.